Yeah, well, of course, there's debate about what consciousness fundamentally is. In the philo-scientific community, as I call it, the philosophical scientific community, my neologism is philo-scientific, to describe the people who work on consciousness. It transcends the boundary between philosophy and science. I don't think there's a clear boundary there anyway. But so the conception of consciousness that I have in mind is fairly straightforward. It's the idea that whatever you're feeling right now or seeing or experiencing, the way to point to it is think about in your current experience, what is your visual experience like? Well, you're looking at a screen, you're seeing colors, you're feeling sensations as you sit or stand, you're hearing things, you're smelling things, touching things. All of this is part of your conscious experience. So sensory consciousness is basic to the idea of consciousness that I have in mind. So it needn't be very complicated. It can be very simple, like the consciousness that is present just as you wake up. There's perhaps a very inchoate sense of being there, but not much content there. There's no vision, no audition, just the bare sense of being perhaps a locus of awareness. In fact, of course, there's debate about whether there's pure consciousness or not. But so my conception of consciousness has to do with sensory consciousness, emotions, perception. It doesn't necessarily have to do with self-consciousness. That can go away. In meditative states, you can have the sense of self that you described drop completely away. And so there's simply the contents of consciousnness without any sense of anyone observing those contents. I've not actually experienced that, but experienced meditators can get there, I think, fairly easily. That said, the sense of self is usually present in one's experience. But as you rightly said, we're not in an observational relationship to our consciousness. The sense of self is an element of our conscious experience that usually is there, but doesn't have to be. The essence of pain is the feeling. And you can't put a feeling on a lab bench, as I think Anil Seth, who's written a great book about consciousness, once put it in a recent debate about consciousness. You can't, and since you can't do that, that poses immediate problem for physicalism. Physicalism being the thesis that anything that's real, you could essentially put on a lab bench and look at.
Mm.
So, but as a naturalist, I don't think we're necessarily committed to physicalism as a thesis about ultimate reality. And it could be that this is an interesting question, an interesting open question. How do we incorporate consciousness into a naturalistic worldview? And is it necessarily the case that physicalism is where we end up? I don't think it's necessarily the case. And that does not commit us to any kind of sort of spooky woo or supernaturalism. It's simply to take the question of consciousness seriously as something to be studied and not ruled out of court simply because you're committed to physicalism as a metaphysical thesis. Science is not committed to physicalism. Mm-hmm. It's committed to understanding consciousness as we decided to think about it. And I'd say the majority still, not everyone, but the majority of people thinking about and studying consciousness do think that phenomenal consciousness, the feels of pain, the feel of tasting sugar, the sensation of red, all of these are real and need accounting for somehow. Mm. In other words, most folks are not illusionists, but illusionists are making a very strong attempt to sort of push back against the very idea of phenomenal consciousness.
Right. And what do you make of the claim that consciousness itself is an illusion? Because that's something I've also heard. And what would you call that belief? It's not an illusionist belief, I think you said, but what would you say about this sort of claim?
I wouldn't know how to interpret it. I mean, to say that something, we'd have to decide what we're talking about, and then say that it's unreal, it doesn't exist. So to say that consciousness doesn't exist would be to say what? That we're not having any experiences right now.
That's how I interpret it, yeah.
Yeah, it would be to say there's no such thing as experience, there's no such thing as sensations or thought. There are no mental phenomena the way we commonly think about them as in dreams or thoughts or feelings. I just don't see how that's a sustainable thing to say. So I don't know who would say there is no such thing as consciousness. Maybe people do say that. I don't know.
I've heard it on the Making Sense podcast a number of just like Sam mentioned it as a ridiculous kind of argument against his position, but
yeah. I think Sam and I and others do take conscious experience as that which it's very difficult to doubt the existence of. And it's a kind of the Cartesian insight that Descartes said that, this is the one thing he couldn't really doubt. And, I'm with him there. But it doesn't mean I'm a Cartesian in supposing that consciousness has to be something necessarily non-physical or necessarily physical. Again, that's an open question. But to say that there is no such thing as consciousness, if a conscious creature asserts that, and only conscious creatures could, it seems like a performative self-contradiction, or performative contradiction, as they say, right?
Right.
You're telling me that there's no consciousness, but so you're not conscious right now, and you're telling me there's no consciousness. Okay, so what is it that's telling me this? There's no experience there. So even the claim that there's no consciousness has to involve an idea, a conception of consciousness, which seems to me to require a conscious creature. But
right. Yeah, the only reason we talk about this problem of consciousness or consciousness in general is that we are conscious and that we have direct experience of it and evidence of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. That's the way Sam Harris usually puts it. So that's the one thing that can't be an illusion, because if it just, he says it seems like it, but the fact that it seems already proves the point, yeah.
But there's something going on right now that both of us are privy to in terms of our own experience, right? Illusionists have to grant that. Dennett grants that. The question is, what is it? And what does it essentially involve? And they're phenomenologists who say who in a way agree with the illusionists, say that there's nothing essentially phenomenal about consciousness, but it's essentially intentional. They put aside, the phenomenologists I've been discovering recently, put aside any metaphysical presupposition, say just look at experience. Don't do any metaphysics, just look at the nature of your experience, and you'll see that it's essentially intentional, that is representational. It's not essentially phenomenal the way I think. Okay, fair enough. So again, there are different ideas of what consciousness essentially involves. But to say there's nothing there, I don't know. That's where I plant my flag with Descartes.
Yeah.
But that's the only place I would plant it with good old Rene, since I'm not a dualist.
Right.
I'm agnostic, metaphysically agnostic right now, right? But I stick with science and investigating what consciousness might be. It's an open question.